Okay, so good morning again, and so the next thing I'm going to do, I've already done the lesson. You guys know how to graph, sine, and cosine, hopefully at this point. So now all I have to do is test you on it, which is going to be this week's. I'll give you one more assignment for a little bit more practice, and then the test, and then that's it for this week. So I have this video as the review. So the first thing that we got to do is figure out what we're doing. So the only thing I'm going to test you on, okay, is the graph for the sine and cosine. Okay, and there's only one thing you're going to be allowed to use for this test. You can use a unit circle. And that's it, okay? Otherwise, it's completely online, and I will put a permission slip that I'm going to send out to your parents. It's going to say that you made sure that your child did this test on their own and with just a unit circle. Okay, so it's going to be 20 questions. And they're all going to be my version of multiple choice. You guys know what my version of multiple choice looks like. It's not super easy. It'd be nice if it was, but it's not. Okay, so this is what it's going to be, very simply. The things I'm going to have on it are the general forms of each equation. Okay, now I will ask about the general forms just specifically themselves. So there are two of them, obviously, because we have two different graphs. So the first one for sine is y equals a times sine of b times x minus h plus k. And cosine is very similar. It's y equals cosine, or a times cosine of b times x minus h plus k. Okay, so here's the general forms, very simply, where absolute value of a is the amplitude, y equals k is the midline, the period is the distance of 2 pi over b, and h is the horizontal shift, where k is the vertical shift. Okay, so these are the things that you have to know about just the equations themselves. So I'll ask you specifically about all of these. I'll give you an equation and I'll ask you what's the midline. I'll give you an amplitude and I'll give you an equation and I'll ask what the amplitude is, the period, so on and so forth. I will ask you for all of these things at one point or another. I may even mix and match, so be careful. Okay, also, there's one other thing that I mentioned when I first did the video, but I didn't get very far into it. The sine and the cosine graphs are nearly identical, and because of that, you can actually transform one into the other. So I'm going to put those here because I will ask you about that. I won't make you use it, but I will ask you about it. Okay, so the transformations, if you have the sine, okay, it turns into cosine by moving pi over 2. Okay, now you have to move pi over 2 in the right direction for it to match. And it's actually, cosine is the sine moved pi over 2 to the left. So it'd be cosine of x plus pi over 2 is the transformation from sine to cosine. Is it? No, it's minus. I'm sorry, the sine is the cosine moved to the left. I have to graph this. This is very confusing to do in my head. Okay, so sine, cosine, and this would be my pi over 2, this one's 0. Okay, so sine needed to go pi over 2 to the left because cosine needs to become pi over 2 to the right, which means this one is plus. right the first time. I thought it was. So cosine needs to go the other direction. So it'll be sine of x minus pi over 2. Okay, remember everything needs to be in radians because that's the only way that you can use that unit circle appropriately. So let's keep going. Okay, so the next thing you needed to remember is how to graph each of them. Okay, so I'm gonna graph the parents, and then if you need to graph anything other than the parents, then you can go back to the assignment that I've given. You know, I always take questions usually directly from it. So I have 18 of you who've missed the assignment. Make sure to please do it. Okay, so parents. First and foremost is going to be the sine one for me just because. So I'll do y equals sine x, and then the second one I'll do is the cosine. Okay, so for sine I need a graphing plane obviously, so I will make one. Not going very far to the left, so I won't have a very far distance to the left. And then I want my cosine. Okay, so I need a few things. I need amplitude, I need period for me to be able to label these axes. My amplitude is absolute value of 1, which is 1. So my y-axis is going to be in ones. Okay, my period is 2 pi over 1, which is 2 pi. All right, so because the unit circle has 4 quadrants, I'm going to take 2 pi and divide it by 4. And that'll tell me what each of my spots on my x-axis will be. So 2 pi divided by 4 is pi over 2. So this will be pi over 2. And then I've got pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. I can keep going if I really want to. I don't really need to because I will only require 1 period whenever I ask for these things. A maximum of 2, but I really kind of only want to have to grade 1 period. So now you need your unit circle, okay, and you're going to check what sine of 0 is. So sine of 0 is the y value at 0 radians, and that's 0, okay, and then I'm going to check pi over 2. Sine of pi over 2 in radians is 1. Okay, and then I'm going to check pi. So sine of pi is 0, and then 3 pi over 2 is negative 1, which will be right there. 2 pi is also 0. Okay, so I have all my points plotted and I can therefore graph them. Remember, this is a curve and it should look like one. Okay, so there's my sine function. If I asked you for the midline, what the midline is of this, you should be very easily able to tell me. It's y equals k, and in this case my k is 0. So my midline is y equals 0. All right. Now over the cosine. Now similarly, the cosine's amplitude is the absolute value of 1, which is 1, and its period is 2 pi over 1, which is 2 pi. Okay, so because 1 is my amplitude, my y-axis is going to be in ones. And I'm going to take my 2 pi and divide it by 4 because there are 4 quadrants on the unit circle, and I'll get pi over 2 again. So that's going to be the distance I do. 3 pi over 2 is the next one, and then 2 pi. Okay, now I need to check the cosine. If you go on your unit circle, those are the x values of all of these radian measures. So the x value of cosine of 0 is 1. The x value of cosine of pi over 2 is 0. And x value at pi is negative 1. X value of 3 pi over 2 is 0, and x value at 2 pi is 1. Now, if you end up graphing this and you're like, this looks weird, you can keep going so you can see the rest of the curve. So if I go negative pi over 2, it'll be 0. And if I go 1 more than the 2 pi, which is going to be a 5 pi over 2, I'll get back to 0. Okay? So when I graph all these points, it'll look something like that. If I could go through the 1. All right, it looks something like that. That's my cosine graph. Okay, if you just looked at the first period, this is the first period. And that's 100% acceptable. I know what that looks like. But most people will look at that and be like, oh, it's a parabola. No, not quite. They have different concavities. The way that these curves go are very different. This curve will go down, this one will go up, this one will go up in a different way, this one will go down, this one will go down. So it's very different curves, but it's kind of hard to see without the rest of it. Okay, so the midline for the cosine, okay, this one is actually going to also be y over 0 because you don't see a k written. And the only time I don't have to write plus k is if it's 0. Okay, so now this is all extremely important information, but there's also one other thing I wanted to point out. Okay, and if you look at the graphs that I've drawn right here, okay, the sine is obviously easier to see than the cosine. But if you look at the two graphs I've drawn with their parents, I want you to understand that these are never ending. These will be curves that go on forevermore, and they will look the same no matter where you look on the curve. That's why it's called the periodic graph. Now, this is actually why they use it for music, because it is a predictable curve. The cosine x and the sine x, if I know what one period looks like, I know what they all look like, which is extremely important for a computer to be able to read so it can spit out actual sounds when it's never, ever, ever understood what a drum or a flute or a guitar is. Okay, so I'm going to ask you about all of these things, every single thing on here. Okay, I will post up this picture on OSS Connect with the link for this form. Please understand that for the general form, when I ask you about these things, I may not give you the equation in general form. I may have moved the y or the a, so please be careful to put it back in general form before you say anything about it, okay? So like I may, instead of giving you like y equals 3 cosine x plus 2, I may say instead y minus 2 equals 3 cosine x. Okay, you need to understand that you need to move the 2 back to be able to identify it as k, all right? Okay, so I went through, let me make sure this is everything I'm going to test you on. You know, you can use a unit circle because I didn't have a time to give you a review for the unit circle, so I'll let you use one on this test, but that's it. You need to be able to graph, you need to be able to identify a graph. Periods and amplitudes are extremely important. Also, just check out that worksheet I gave you. I'll ask you questions very similar to that. Whether I'm asking about amplitude or which of the following equations matches the given conditions. I can ask you anything like that, and I will ask you something like that. So be careful about that. And I honestly think that's it. So if you have any more questions for me about what's going to be on your test, or if something I haven't mentioned is going to be on your test, please feel free to chat with me. You know I'm always in during my live session time. Okay, bye.